Hi everyone, I am Damilola Daramola, an assistant professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at Ohio University. And this is a collaboration with Professor Jason Tremblay in the Mechanical Engineering Department at Ohio University. He is also the director of our Institute for Sustainable Energy and the Environment, where we're working on developing technologies and techniques to for more efficient energy use and to find ways to minimize our human impact on the environment. And so in which is the reason for this particular technology here, where we're looking at using an electrochemical technique to reduce waste from animal feeding operations that have an impact on the environment. And I will walk you through what a concentrated animal feeding operation is, also known as a CAFO. Talk about some of the technologies that can be used for management of these nutrients, and then how our technology compares to those. And then I will talk about some of the ways in which we've been able to demonstrate this technology. One thing I would like to point out is there may be some things that are not clear during the talk just because of the limited time that we have. But fortunately for us, this work was published as of 2 weeks ago in the Journal of Electrochemical Society, and I will provide that citation in a few minutes. In addition, I did a talk, an open science talk about this topic, a much longer form of this as well. It was about 50 minutes or so. So that will be available as well as a link um, to you as well, so you can get sort of a richer context for this work in that regard. And so in a concentrated animal feeding operation, you typically have what are known as above 1,000 animal units. So that could be anywhere from 3,000 chickens to maybe about 1,000 pigs or so. That they're done by weight. And so usually these animals are kept in larger areas where their waste is collected in the lagoon. And the thing to keep in mind here is the reason behind some of these concentrated animal feeding operations is due to global megatrends. We have a larger or we have an increase in population growth, but also we have an increase in population density as well due to urbanization, where people are moving from rural areas to urban areas. And this doesn't just happen in the United States, it happens in places like Nigeria, where I'm from as well. And so more intense energy and food consumption is going to lead to more intense energy and food production as well. And so this waste is to make this process sustainable. This waste is actually used as fertilizer for crops, right? And so when that is done, you have runoff and leaching, and basically these nutrients are supposed to be taken up by the plant end up in water, where it is consumed by algae, and the algae basically grow because the nutrients are also used for plants as well, right? Algae is a plant. It takes up that nutrient and basically covers the surface of the water, leads to fish death and um, just a negative environmental impact known as eutrophication. And so the idea is to incorporate a technology using magnesium as a driving force to combine with nitrogen and phosphorus to form something that is known as struvite. Struvite is a fertilizer in itself, but it's a slow release fertilizer, such that when you put it on land, all the nutrients do not leave at once, so you don't get the leaching and then runoff. You would basically it releases this over a period of time, and so that helps to reduce the impact of eutrophication. In addition, because the amount of nutrients in this waste has been reduced, that can now be used again as fertilizer, even though it's fast release, but that would negate the impact of the leaching and runoff that we get. And so the goal is to find ways to remove or reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus and recover it, and be able to reduce or eliminate the impact of that on the environment. And so some of the technologies that I use are either chemical or microbiological treatment. And this is both for animal waste and for human waste as well. And in human waste at municipal wastewater treatment plants, chemical precipitation is done by use of iron or aluminum or known as alum. But the issue is that, again, the goal here is to look at reducing or treatment of animal waste. And so chemical precipitation requires some domain knowledge, right? To know how much magnesium to put, how much sodium hydroxide to put, what pH you need. And so that would something that would need to be outsourced by the farmer. In addition, a lot of these technologies have actually been deployed especially the chemical one, has been deployed more at municipal wastewater treatment plants. And so things like economies of scale are great if you have a sort of a centralized municipal wastewater treatment plant, but they couldn't quite work for a decentralized operation like animal feeding operation. So using Ohio as an example, you can see on the west side of Ohio, you have this huge concentration, or this large concentration of farming operations. But as you go further east, um, the um, the farms become more decentralized. And so whatever technology we're going to deploy here to handle this waste would need to be something that would be able to negate these issues with the state of the art. So the technology would need to be modular, something that's easy to operate by a switch, and also it has to be cost competitive with current technologies, which right now, because these CAFOs are regulated, they typically would transport these nutrients outside. So what we're competing here is not just a technology that works, but it has to be competitive with the cost of transportation. And this is where electrochemical technologies come into play, because they do not suffer the effect of economies of scale that the microbiological systems or the chemical systems suffer. In addition, most electrochemical systems have to have the process control integrated, and therefore that makes it easy to operate for someone who doesn't even have the domain knowledge at all. Just like the way you use your battery as well, for instance, would be some of the ways. And I've provided some examples of electrochemical technologies here, because depending on what your familiarity is with the area, you can get some sense of some of the technologies here. And so our particular technology is an electrolyzer, because it takes electrical energy and converts it to chemical. And really here what's happening is that we're doing an indirect conversion. So in our electrochemical system, we're taking dissolved oxygen and water and converting it to hydroxide. These hydroxide ions are what control the form of the phosphate that we have. So more hydroxide means we're going to go from an acidic form to um, um, a phosphate that has no protons on it. That phosphate combines with ammonium and magnesium to generate struvite. So it's indirect in the sense that we're not forming this struvite based on our electrochemical reaction. We're forming OH, which then controls the form of struvite. And there are a variety of variables that affect the operation or the recovery of phosphorus. And the ones we've studied are calcium, flow conditions, cell voltage, and temperature. And what was found is that there are certain conditions where we optimize our phosphorus recovery and also have a reduced cost based on the energy consumed by the technology. Right. And so what you see here is that we want reduced cost based on our operation and high phosphorus recovery. And actually, a key thing here is to look at what happens in the presence of calcium. So as we add calcium to the system, our recovery cost goes up and then comes back down, and we think, well, this is great. We have a low cost at 210 ppm, but in actual fact, the phosphorus recovery drops down to less than 10% at this 210 ppm. So this is not good for our technology, and this is really important because our animal waste is going to have calcium present in there, which means that we're going to be suffering from these effects that we see, and it's important to understand what calcium is doing in our system. In fact, what we see is if we look at the current generated, so we're controlling the voltage in the system and measuring the current. And when there is no calcium in the system, we see a significant drop off in current over time. The reason for this drop off is because when the struvite forms, it deposits on the surface and blocks our catalyst. And now there's techniques we can use to remove that struvite while this is in operation. But the key thing here is that this drop off in current is a good thing for what we're trying to do. And so what you see is that as we increase the amount of calcium in the system, we don't have this current drop off, which tells us that we're not getting surface deposition due to struvite formation. We're not forming struvite. And even if let's assume that we're forming something else where the phosphorus is being recovered, what we realize is that as we increase the amount of calcium in the system, so as we go from the top to the bottom here, you can see that the phosphorus recovery is decreasing, because at high calcium, we have almost no recovery. So that is not, like I said, that is not good for our work, because we might see a low cost, but our process is not efficient. And this here is a publication I mentioned earlier. It's open access, open source. So note that citation, because you can go and get a full flavor of the work by looking at that paper. So based on this operation, based on these experiments, the thought here was, let's develop a process model that will look at and explore the effect of pH and calcium ions on our system. And so in our system, we are controlling pH by controlling the voltage to generate hydroxide. But in this particular setup, what we decided to do was we would start off with just using sodium hydroxide as our source of hydroxide ions, and then improve our model by doing other things later on. And the goal here is to look at the effect of this on precipitation of struvites. And so we expect, based on thermodynamics, that if these are present in a certain concentration, if that ionization potential is greater than the equilibrium constant, we will get deposition. So we're going to form struvites. On the other hand, if this combination of species is less than the thermodynamic, less than the equilibrium constant, then we will get no struvite. So your saturation index should be greater than 1 for deposition and less than 1 for no deposition. And this system will allow us to understand that. And so this process model was developed in Aspen Plus with an understanding that as we drive the pH in the system by increasing hydroxide ions, we're going to see the speciation of these ions in our system. And so what you notice is that as I go from a low pH to a high pH, I go from having dihydrogen phosphate ions to having phosphate ions. In addition, because of our ammonium-ammonia couple, as we increase the pH, you go from having ammonium to having ammonia, where, keep in mind, ammonium and phosphate is what we would want for struvite formation. So we really want to be somewhere where we have both ammonium and we have phosphate. And then we know that there's some competing solid species that could form as well in the presence of magnesium and in the presence of calcium. And so what I would like to point out here is that we have not explored the entire space. There are so many different phosphate species and magnesium species, more than the ones captured here. But this is sort of the first look at the way in which our solids interact with our system. And so this was a good first approximation as a first step in the calculation. And so what we notice is that when we have no calcium in the system, our struvite is going to form potentially between 6.8 and 12. Noting that outside of below 6.8 and above 12, we will get no struvite formation. And you see that, in fact, when we have magnesium phosphate in the system, at this high pHs, we're going to form mostly magnesium phosphate. And the reasoning behind that is at a pH of about 12, our ammonium in our system drops to almost 0. So we have mostly ammonia, which then means that we have available magnesium and available phosphate to form magnesium phosphate, but we have no nitrogen-based species to drive the formation of struvite, which is why outside of 12, this drops to below 0. And again, this is specific to this magnesium nitrogen phosphorus. If this was modified in some way, this system would look different. Once we add calcium in the system, so this 0.17 ratio is for 72 ppm and the 0.49 ratio is for 210 ppm. What we notice is that our calcium species start to compete. The calcium phosphate starts to take out the phosphate from the system and competes with the amount of struvite you can recover. We also notice that the window for struvite recovery shrinks. So if we vary the amount of calcium in the system and we vary the pH, we end up with a heat map that shows that most of our struvite is going to be recovered when we have basically no calcium in the system, because there's no competition for species that magnesium would need to form struvite. In addition, what we notice is that our window, as we increase the amount of calcium in the system, the window for struvite formation starts to decrease. And so in our one-factor analysis that we're conducting, what we realize is that once we start to increase the calcium in the system, we would need to modify our potential where we have this reaction occurring, because if we modify the potential, if we increase the potential, that will increase the amount of hydroxide we can generate, and that would actually precipitate or allow struvite deposition to occur. And so based on this model, and again, these results can be found in this manuscript, we have been able to confirm that what we require here is to operate our system at a set of variables that differ from where we have the optimum conditions. Once you start to change, for instance, the calcium you have in the system, we're going to have other competing ions as well. So you have things like sulfates and nitrates and so on and so forth. we'll need to operate or drive our thermodynamics based on our potential to get better Struve recovery. This work would have not been possible without the sponsorship of the Ohio Water Development Authority and my colleagues at AIChE, which includes Zineb, who is now who now works at the National Lab, and Dr. Tremblay. And then the future work that's going to be performed here in terms of multi-factor analysis on the experimental side and the theoretical side will be done by my two students who started with me over the summer and the fall, Tunde and Garrett. And with that, I'd like to leave you with my contact information, as well as this link to this longer presentation that talked about the work that I presented here. And I will be available for the Q&A session on Friday to answer any questions that you have. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you.